viewers, my name is Chris, and I welcome you again to another very interesting topic in our show, Diaspora Life Show. We are still talking about the US elections, what happened recently with the election of President-elect now, Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris as the Vice President. And today we are going to discuss about the implications of the US elections and the patterns that emerge to countries in Africa, especially in Kenya. And again, as always, I have just the best that you can find in the diaspora. All these guys are professors. I'm proud to say that I have the best brains in the diaspora, and as always, we have Sister Mkawasi. She teaches at Howard University, where Kamala Harris went to school. She walks the corridors that now the Vice President walked. I'm joined again by Brother Washington Osiro from the big state in the US, the state that has 55 delegates, and that's California. Is from San Francisco, California. And for the first time, we are joined by Dr. Charles Choti. Choti is a teacher. He teaches, just like Professor Monda, he teaches these things. So we are privileged to have him on the show. And as always, we have our classroom teacher, Professor David Monda from New York City. Professor Monda teaches at City University in New York. And again, we are privileged to have Professor Shadrach Nasongo Wanjala. He's joining us from Tennessee, the red state, as it were. So straight away to our discussions, and I'm going to call on Professor Monda to frame our discussions. Professor, take it from there, Professor.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Chris. As usual, I'm humbled to be in the presence of such an incredible panel of Kenyans. And thank you, Chris, for making this happen again. The Diaspora Life Show is really incredible. We've had a very contentious election here in the United States. And a couple of things really stood out for me in terms of sort of framing and thinking about these elections. One was that very much like Kenya, United States is a country that's struggling with this experiment we call democracy. It's been around for 400 years, but we can see even after 400 years, we're still talking about rigging. We're talking about vifaranga kuzaliwa, you know, these chicks being hatched on Trump's side. And we're talking about struggles around democracy. So I think it's a continuous process that we are still trying to perfect, even in the United States as we are in Kenya. I think the second issue is around what does somebody who's defeated in an election, what do you do when you're defeated? What happens when you've had a tradition of people who lose in elections peacefully conceding and having a peaceful transfer of power? What happens even in democratic societies, well-established democracies, when this does not happen? We've had this problem in Africa and in Kenya for many years, where people were defeated in elections, talk about rigging, and say they've not legitimately lost an election. So this has happened in the US, and in particular for once, we've had a candidate, one refused to concede. And as we speak today, we are not even sure that Donald Trump will show up for Joe Biden's inauguration, which will be another norm which will be very much violated if he decides he doesn't want to show up. Plus the implications of the stability of the country should Donald Trump refuse to concede and continue to agitate his supporters as he's done today. So for me, two very interesting broad things about the struggles we still have with democracy in United States like we have in Kenya. And then this very difficult question of how does somebody who legitimately lose an election, how do you eat your humble pie and take your role in the opposition as a loyal member of the opposition to help the country move forward.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks, Professor. I want to go to Dr. Choti, but before I do that, let me go to Sister Mkawasi, the only lady on the panel. Sister Mkawasi, the parallels have been made between Trump and the doyen of opposition in Kenya, and that's Engineer Honorable Raila, Prime Minister Odinga. Of course, I don't know if it's true or not, but the assumption is that in Kenya, elections are always stolen. So he may have some legs to stand on. But seeing what's happening in America right now, can you draw some parallels with Kenya?
Well, I think one of the biggest parallels I can draw is that it seems clear to me that the male ego has been the greatest threat to democracy, and I say this because the thing that seems to be preventing people who have either lost elections or have stolen elections from coming out right and saying, this was not a fair thing, is that ego that drives someone to saying, I have to have this position. By hook or crook, I have to have this position. Now, I do not have female candidates to compare to when I say the male ego, but I'm looking at this domination status that comes so powerfully from men, from someone like Trump, whose misogynistic ways we have seen, and who dominates space in a sense to say he can never lose or concede to losing. And we see the same thing with Kenyan male leaders, who is all we have had for presidencies, and with all the stolen elections, all the rigged elections. It's mainly males who play these roles. Of course, the question comes up, what would women leaders or presidents or contenders do in cases like this? I wouldn't know. I'm speaking from observation and looking at how men tend to behave when it comes to struggles for power.
Thanks, Mkawasi. Dr. Charles Choti, what are your takeaways from the US election?
Yes, thank you, Chris. I think, as most of you can agree with me, especially my friend Dr. Nansongo, a political scientist, democracy can be messy. Democracy is an ideal. It is not 100% attainable, but unfortunately, it is the best political system that we can operate on. But for democracy to be more effective for us in organizing our political institutions, we need a certain high levels of integrity, especially among the politicians, the leaders, the elitists, because mostly the voters, the masses normally look upon their leaders for guidance. When you tell them lies all the time, you confuse them. You confuse the entire political environment. So, and that's exactly what has happened in America. Because the voters are confused, especially Trump has been using some, propaganda, conspiracies, lies, and most of the followers, most of his supporters believe in that. While the others are trying to be more dignified, especially his opponent, Joe Biden, and sincere in what he says. And you can see this because Trump says this votes have been stolen, the system is not good. But when he's told to produce evidence, it's not there. It's not there. And then the best thing, the best lesson we can learn from this American way of things is that we should strengthen our institutions. We should not allow irregularities to be so much, because at the end of the day, the world is coming to understand that the American election was not that bad. Because when Trump and his team were asked for evidence to demonstrate that there was cheating, he has nothing to offer. Most of the cases he has taken to court have been thrown out by the clerks because they don't meet the threshold. So I think for Democrats to prosper and be more entrenched, especially in countries like Kenya, we need first to uphold integrity, honesty, and transparency. Those are the principles of Democrats. Without them, I don't think we can go far in terms of in our political sphere. That's my take.
Thanks, Dr. Choti. And Professor Nasongo, like Dr. Choti says, right now as it seems like democracy is coming up short in terms of people's expectations. As a social scientist and a political scientist, what do you see as the threats against democracy, not only in America but also in young countries in Africa, especially Kenya?
Thank you very much, Chris. Two quick points I want to make. Number one, when you compare the US and Kenya, one of the major differences is the strength of the institutions of the American political system. And this has been made reference to by Dr. Choti. To the extent that even when the incumbent president is arguing that these elections have been stolen and that he's supposed to have won, the institutions are moving on. The process was good. Those who manage the security of the elections have judged this election to have been the most secure in the history of the US. And things are moving forward. The process of transition is going on, irrespective of the feelings of the incumbent president. And that speaks to the strength of the institutions of the US. Number two, the major weakness of the US institution, hundreds of years though it is the fact that there has been an inherent tendency to rely on the general goodness of individuals. That individuals will just behave, you lose an election, you go away. Nobody expected a character like the current president who is testing these institutions to the full. And that is a very huge development that will test these institutions to see whether they survive or not. Now, the idea that democracy is at risk, perhaps it is not, right? It is only under threat by individuals who seek to mobilize along particular lines. And the extent of the nationalistic tendency on the part of the current president, that is where you might begin to think that perhaps it endangers democracy. Otherwise, as long as this transition goes on, as long as the president-elect is sworn in, I think at the end of the day, the US will still survive as a democracy, and we have a lot to learn from this democratic process in the United States.
Thanks, Professor Nasongo. Brother Washington, what the two gentlemen have said is very true, in the sense that for democracy to thrive, you have to have institutions that are very strong. But we've seen over time, since the inauguration of the new constitution in Kenya in 2010, and especially after the judiciary in Kenya nullified the elections, President Uhuru Kenyatta has systematically been trying to emasculate and weaken the judiciary. Can you speak to that, please?
Chris, thank you very much for this opportunity. And again, it's an honor to be amongst such intellectual heavyweights. So I think somebody alluded to this point earlier on, and that is underpinning all the democracy and the democratic institutions are human beings. And by nature, we are selfish. So it is not a surprise that somebody who feels entitled, as let's just be candid, as Uhuru Kenyatta and the current president Donald Trump they feel entitled to either maintain their position in power or have access to power. They are going to basically look at these institutions not as independent institutions designed to address the greater good. They're going to look at them as instruments they can use to further their hold on power. And I think that's what we are seeing with the ongoing refusal to concede to Joe Biden. And I think we are seeing the same thing with this manipulation of the Constitution with the BBI discussion, basically formalizing the perpetuation of people who feel entitled to stay in power that I think we see with Uhuru and Trump. So institutions are as good as the people charged with executing them, and if the people who are executing them are fallible, then the institutions are going to basically be manipulated to do their doings, to do their bidding. So that's one, that institutions are basically executed on by people. The other thing that I also see is the malleability of this whole construct of democracy. I mean, you find that, yes, you go back to 2016 when Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but she didn't win the Electoral College. So all of a sudden, you have this discussion about, well, what is democracy? Well, democracy is not as clear-cut as we have been led to believe. So that's another discussion that, another point that, or another lesson that the ongoing, process of this just concluded elections is going to highlight, is that democracy is not as cut and dry as we are made to believe. Because the person who won the row votes did, in this case, yes, Biden won the total row vote and also the Electoral College, but Hillary Clinton won the row votes in 2016 and lost the Electoral College, and she didn't become president. So how does that align with democracy being, rule of of the popular vote? And then the last thing that I want to touch on is this construct of American exceptionalism, where America has presented itself to be this shining city on the hill where people aspire to learn from. Well, all of a sudden, we are seeing the making of the sausage, that is the American democratic process, and it's not as pretty as we have been made to believe. Suddenly, all votes are not being counted. Well, some are being counted and others are not. So it's just another interesting twist on things that Americans and the world have taken for granted about their country, that they're a society to be emulated, but not really, because all of a sudden we are seeing that it's got there's some work that it needs to do to make sure that the process is transparent, free of manipulation, and and it's far from perfect. So I think those are the three things that I take from the elections, that democratic institutions are manned by people. People are inherently selfish. They're going to manipulate them especially if they feel entitled. And then the democracy is a malleable construct, and that American exceptionalism is definitely up for a review.
Thanks, Osiro. Professor, Osiro has just kicked this back to you, and that's Professor Monda. This show started with the discussion on American exceptionalism almost a year ago, and I remember you gave very compelling reasons as to why American exceptionalism is more of a manipulative construct than a reality. Seeing what's happening in America, and the world has seen the flaws within American democracy. Your students on Monday are going to ask you, is this the beginnings of the end? What is all this about the best from America? That doesn't really gel with what we are seeing. Professor, what are you going to tell your students?
Oh, I would tell them what Alexander Hamilton said about 2.5 centuries ago, that you know, the country is set, the democracy is laid, and it's only as good as the citizens who are willing to step out there and keep it. So citizens need to be active, and we saw from this past election on both sides, Republicans and Democrats, people turning out in record numbers to vote, which I think is extremely important. I'd push back a little bit on what Professor Nasongo was you know, alluding to, because I think there's always a danger in any democracy for us to deconsolidate with democracy, for democracy to move backwards. We can never assume that just because we've had a democratic system for 400 years that things will continue to be democratic. We constantly need to keep rebuilding. And I say that in two ways. In the United States, we've seen Donald Trump become the blessing and the curse at the same time. He's been the blessing because he's really tested our institutions and the strength of our institutions. But he's also a curse in the context that he started a process of destroying norms which have been in place for many, many years. And a very simple one is concession and the integrity and legitimacy of our system. He's really questioned that. And this is a very dangerous thing that we've had in Africa, in Kenya for many years. When losers of election, whether the election was free and fair, they will always say they lost. And individuals who are in power want to do what Donald Trump was doing over his last 4 years. He's been putting individuals, bureaucrats who are party loyalists within the security forces, within the defense forces. He has been denying the legitimacy of our electoral institutions, even when there's no evidence to say he lost an election, which is something that we've had a big problem with in Africa. But also, thirdly, he's really created a problem within the context that he's not allowed his supporters to take the role of active and loyal opposition. In other words, it seems for the next 4 years, Joe Biden will always have a question mark over his administration, very much like Uhuru Kenyatta has had for the past 10 years, I would say, about his election, not only in 2013, but in 2012, but also in 2017. So democracy is a dangerous game because it's very helpful in terms of empowering people. But every day we wake up, we have to be vigilant about strengthening our democracy. I think that's one. And number two, as much as we strengthen our institutions, it's really important that individuals ensure that these institutions are run by career individuals who can uphold the values and ethics of the democratic game. And in Kenya in particular, I'm talking about the IEBC. And for us to have bureaucrats or individuals, careerists, who can run the IEBC above board and with integrity, rather than them being the gatekeepers for either the ODM party or for the Jubilee administration. We need people who can be free, honest, and fair with these electoral institutions, as happened in the United States.
Thanks, Professor. Professor Nasongo, Professor Monda mentioned you. I want, please respond before I go to Mukawasi.
Yes, Professor Monda, you are right to a great extent about the fact that democracy is a continuous process and it's always a work in progress. It has been the case in the US. In any event, African Americans only gained the right to vote just a couple of decades ago. And there has always been a move on the part of conservative politicians to suppress the vote of minorities because they tend to vote the other way. That is true. But the fact that because of how long democracy has been in practice in the United States, it has generated institutions that are strong enough to survive, that is something that cannot be gainsaid. You can imagine if this election were in Kenya or elsewhere on the continent, with the cases that are going in court, they will be very much manipulated. But look at it now. Trump can take a case to court in Arizona. He takes a case to court in Pennsylvania, in Georgia, and so on. They are just thrown away. If these institutions were not strong enough, that would not be the case. But secondly, I mentioned the fact that the system has always, it was designed to rely too much on the goodness and the integrity of individuals. That is why the emergence of a Trump is really testing these institutions. And whether they survive or not, of course, the jury is out there. But the fact is that I don't think anyone will doubt the legitimacy of President Biden once he is sworn in. The only people who are going to question the legitimacy of the president-elect will be Trump's most ardent followers, who are not the best informed people in any case.
Thanks, Professor Nasongo. Mkawasi, in fact, this gentlemen are very right. And looking at the Kenyan scene, we've seen this, of course, you know. Anytime Raila appears or loses the election, his followers will never believe that he lost the election. But what I want you to talk to right now is about you know, the fact that you know, many people, we put a lot of stock in. Especially the Democrats, put a lot of stock in women to turn up in large numbers to change the discussion. Right. But the exit polls have shown that Trump, in fact, won more white women this time around than he did in 2016. What's the dichotomy around that issue?
Well, for one, the women vote in the U.S. It's a block. They vote as a block. Compared to Kenya, women don't vote as a block. So, you know, there's a lot of analysis as to why that happens, and one of the issues is white women will vote for white, will vote for a candidate who doesn't come with the baggage of having a black running mate. Biden had a black running mate, and white women are still steeped in that very American caste system where your place in society, depending on where you are, your race, really determines what you get. It's attached to your economic well-being. It's attached to your social well-being, and so voting for Trump is one for white women going to speak to exactly what Trump was saying. I'm going to protect suburbia. I'm going to protect your homes against infiltration from minorities, which in essence is going to, infiltration from minorities means is going to lower their house value, their home values. So they will vote for what is to them, to their own best interest as white women who need to continue having the best of the American pie. Now, as far as the people in Kenya or the electorate in Kenya always thinking that their candidate has won, like what you mentioned, Raila's people will never accept that their candidate has lost. This speaks to exactly what I was saying before at the very beginning, that Kenyan elections, like we see in American elections right now, are very much run on an ego level. I think there's something Mwalimu Osiro said that is very important, that the institutions are just as good as the people who are in it. Now, the presidential candidates are very key in formulating the ethos of a political system in a place. If you have the kind of candidate who gets up and, for example, sells the dream of change and hope and really captures the imagination of the nation, it kind of alters the political ethos so much that a lot of white people who voted for Trump will vote for that candidate who captured that imagination, who happens to be Obama. So what I'm saying is, the person who is there, if they put themselves in such a position as they are going to change how people feel about elections, how people feel about the institutions that have been guiding them, that is going to change. And you know, that is something we need as Kenyans. What Kenyans have seen in America is, oh, these guys are just like us. They play egoistic games just like us. They are just as fickle, as greedy, as manipulative as us. You know, there's no difference between them and us. America is no longer the bearer, the keeper of, and the protector of democracy. They are no different from those of us who run things like we're animals who need the bone, who need to get the bone.
You know, let me piggyback on what Ms. Hall mentioned. Is it any surprising that Donald Trump's that Kenya and Nigeria, you know, in all of Africa, have how do I phrase it? That Donald Trump's biggest support in Africa came from Kenyans and Nigerians, given his conduct over the last 4 years. I mean, there's something to be said about that. That all of a sudden they see someone in the image of their God-chosen leaders.